Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here and shout out to our mutual friend for this introduction. It's already been a gift. So, my name is Tracie Jae. In business and in life, I am the quiet rebel. My work in the world is creating incremental and organic shifts to the status quo using mostly conversations as instruments for change. These days, when people ask me what I do, I say that I am a human culture strategist and educator. It feels like a mouthful, but the things I used to say before that didn't really feel accurate. So I'm trying to get more clear about what it is I do in the world and how I do it.
Mm. Yeah. What it is you do in the world and how you do it. And as you get more clear and communicating that out into the world for folks who are listening and you're taking part in that practice yourself, as you get more clear about the messages we're communicating, it also provides clarity to the folks we're communicating to. It brings us the folks that we can be in solidarity with. I was talking about this with another guest too, also, is as you were saying, Tracy, being clear, communicating your message, what you do into the world, and your message will land because, in a way, even our meeting came as a result of, hey, communicating to the folks and the message resonated with who it needed to resonate with. And then here we are today. So thank you so much
Exactly.
for being here. As you reflect on your own origin stories, you mentioned wanting to talk about how your family both shielded you and prepared you for racial injustice. And also mentioning the breadcrumbs, those experiences that helped you to know that what we're experiencing societally in many ways shouldn't be normal.
Yes, I grew up in a really solid nuclear family. My parents are still married. They have been married for 55 years at this point. Are still living in the same house where I grew up, and it was my parents and my sister and me. And that was it. That was our family. That is our family. And I grew up in a mostly homogenous community. Most people would describe it as middle class or middle income community, mostly Black and brown people. And our neighborhood was a result of white flight. So my parents moved there in the early 70s, and people who were not Black and brown moved out. That neighborhood still looks very much like the neighborhood I grew up in. And in my early childhood, I went to schools with mostly Black people. And so this is where I say my family shielded me, right? I went to primary school with mostly Black children, had mostly Black teachers through fourth grade. And that experience really shaped how I see Blackness, how I see Black people, and how I see community. And then in fifth grade, my world sort of shifted a little bit because my father decided that my sister and I needed to go to the schools with smart children, air quotes, smart children, because I was already in schools with smart children. But there were designated schools, you know, for the gifted and talented. And so we took these tests and we were enrolled in schools for the gifted and talented. They were called Vanguard schools in Houston, where I live. And the fifth grade was the first time I was ever in a classroom with students from all kinds of backgrounds. And then I was able to completely be Tracy. There are breadcrumbs, right, that I mentioned. History teacher was away this particular day, and the
Mm,
student prepared a lesson on the pros and cons of slavery.
mhm. The pros
Yeah,
and cons now.
the
Pros?
the pros and cons of
Okay.
slavery. This is the first one of the earliest moments that I can recall where I felt the need to stand up for myself and stand up for the people around me and to offer people something else to hear. It was probably the birth of the quiet rebel.
I see. Okay. Okay.
And I remember I don't remember the dialogue, of course, because this has been 40 years now. But I do remember saying, "There are no pros. You can't convince me that there are pros." I remember her trying to offer us what she thought were the pros, and our class, not just me, but our class, rebutting everything she offered. And I remember her crying. And I don't remember it in this way from past tense, but today I would say it was a very clear example of white women tears.
Okay, I was yep. Mhm.
And let me be clear when I say that it is okay for white women to cry. It is not okay for white women or any people to use those tears to try to get out of accountability for the harm that they've caused to somebody else.
Accountability. Yeah.
Right? You should not use your tears to skip accountability or to to make it look like someone has harmed you when in fact you are the harmer.
Mhm.
Um, and I've had an occasion or two to speak with the regular teacher from that time who was our history teacher. And he remembers that incident as well. And he remembers us saying to him, "Please don't ever leave us alone with this woman again. She is harmful."
Never again. Never again. Yeah. And so you say that was one of those first experiences where you felt, "I have to speak up not just for myself, but also the people around me." Yeah.
Right. We cannot let this stand.
And do you remember what ended up happening after that? Did the teacher never come back? Did you all like when your regular teacher came back, did y'all kind of have a reset? Because it also sounded like in the story too, the other kids in the class at that time were also united with you in that no, like what are we debating about this for? You know, what do you mean pros to slavery? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I don't actually have real memories about what happened next, but
Okay.
I do remember that my classmates and I were unified in this moment.
All right. So you talk about the breadcrumbs that led you to really, really recognize and understand this shouldn't be normal. Yeah. It didn't sound like a normal discussion. Like, that's not no.
No, it's
Yeah.
not normal. Middle school was a really formative time for me. Now that I'm like looking back at it as an adult, we had a different incident that happened in my personal life in that same space of time. My family went on a road trip. We took a lot of road trips when I was growing up.
Mhm.
And and my parents had decided they wanted to go to New Jersey to visit Atlantic City. They gamble, we gamble as a family, we're gamblers. And they had been to Las Vegas several times, but had never been to Atlantic City, so they wanted to go to Atlantic City. And as a sort of trade-off for taking us on this really long road trip, they also took my sister and me to Disney World.
Mhm.
So this was, by all accounts, a great family experience. The sort of cherry on the top of that experience was that we went in my daddy's brand new Cadillac. So his dream car, a red Cadillac.
Okay.
So we are leaving Texas, traveling east in this red Cadillac, the four of us. Um, and at some point on our journey, and I don't recall now if it was coming or going, we were pulled over by a white police officer. Um, and I remember it being at night. I remember feeling a different kind of fear than I've ever felt. I still feel it in my body, that palpable fear.
That same
Or
fear.
that not knowing why I felt this fear, right? Because I had never been really exposed to what I knew to be racism then, but it just didn't feel good. It felt frightening. And in a recent conversation with my family about that incident, um, I was reminded that the police officer asked if that was his car. And my sister being um, taken aback by the fact that this man was asking a man with a wife and two children with a car full of stuff if that was his car. And that is another sort of pivotal moment in my formation as a human and as an activist and as a speaker and a writer and a thinker.
Yeah.
Because why?
Mhm.
Because there was no reason.
There was no reason. There was no reason. It's this assumption. Oh, wow, look at this. This is a nice Cadillac, and here we go. We got this black man here driving. That's too much car for you. Like, how did you get this? Is this your car? Are you sure this is your car? Like, it had more to do with that officer's socialization and the way he had been uh, indoctrinated into white supremacy and racism. Yeah, but it still impacted your lives, though. In that moment, it still impacted you. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It impacted me for a long time.
yeah.
I still am uneasy with police officers. Like
Hmm.
this is it's a core memory in my cells at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
There were others. There are things that I recognize in hindsight that were actively racist that I didn't realize in that moment. Right. In high school, I was on the speech and debate team and uh I used to do something called I want to say it was called extemporaneous prose. That feels right. That might not be the right
Mhm.
label. But we had to read a passage, right? That's all we're doing is reading,
Yeah,
right? But I chose a passage from Their Eyes Were Watching God. And if you are familiar with the text in that book, it is antebellum English. It is, African American English vernacular. It is the language of people who were not trained to read and write and taught themselves, right?
that's right. That's right.
Uh, and it is difficult for a person who was trained in Queen's English, if you will, um, to speak and to read. And so when the scorers of that event handed back my score, they said I chose something that was too easy. And as if that was not enough, the people who practiced with me, my teachers, who knew how hard I practiced and trained and how difficult this was for me, did not speak up for me.
Okay. Did not speak up. Mm.
So I knew in the moment that recognized it as racism. Right. This is an adult lens looking back at that, calling it that, because we have to call a thing a thing. Right. They looked at me and they looked at the words on the page and they decided that surely she must speak that way already. And that surely
Mm.
she chose something that was simple for her.
As you talk about the breadcrumbs, you're taking us along on your journey in the story. A similar assumption that was made around, like, how could you possibly afford this car? How is this your car? And also another assumption of surely she must talk like this already, right? Rooted in their white imagination. So I'm seeing the through line and you recognizing it as racism now, but at that time didn't necessarily have that language for it. Yeah.
I didn't have that language for it. What I recognized as then was harm,
Yeah.
period. Right.
Yeah.
And we can talk about racism, we can talk about sexism, we can talk about xenophobia, we can talk about anti-trans, anti-queer, and we can talk about all of these things. And at the root of all of those things is harm.
Harm.
It is both eh, the way we are culturalized and socialized in this country and other places in the world, but it is also humans who don't know how to deal with difference acting on it in a way that is harmful.
Mhm.
So one of the lessons that I carry with me and that I try to offer to other people is that every person you know is different from you. And I know that when we are in groups, we're always trying to find the thing that makes us alike. And I'm not saying we should stop doing that. What I am saying is that we should stop ignoring or villainizing the things that make us different. Because there is no person in your life, not even the people who you love the most, the people you like the most, who are the same as you. All of us are different. Full stop.
Yeah. Full stop. All of us are different. And you said, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like humans who are not used to either being around difference, the concept of difference, and are responding to that difference in harmful ways. So, hey, if we could increase our capacity to understand, to not be afraid of difference, maybe we respond to that in ways that aren't harmful, in ways that are more understanding, you know?
Yeah. I think we need some balance in the way we approach community. And part of what we look for people who love the same things we love, who want to be in the same places we're in, who come from generally the same backgrounds and ideologies. I think where we should be looking for sameness is in values. We should be looking for sameness in understanding of the world, right? We should listen to and observe other people's lived experience and not discount it because we don't have a concept of what it is. And I say that, and I'm going to generalize now, but
Mhm.
often Black people and people from other marginalized groups already get that. We already understand that because so often in our lives, in our worlds, we don't have a choice but to understand other people's lived experience and to know in advance how it might impact us.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when say stuff like we should, what I really mean is people who have not lived a marginalized experience need to,
Yeah.
right? Need to learn or unlearn their ideas of difference and to appreciate people's lived experience for what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Appreciate people's lived experience for what it is. And I hear you when you say you're making a generalization, but I hear what you're saying. It's like not only do we know or not have a choice in often recognizing and understanding what difference is, for many of us, I feel like there's also this understanding of what it means when that difference, our lived experience are not accepted and recognized and paid attention to. And knowing what that feels like, being on the outside of these systems that are said to be for everybody. So having that capacity to acknowledge and understand difference as it is, and then also knowing what it feels like the absence of the acceptance of that. So I appreciate you sharing that.